is another episode of the Juice on the Cuse podcast. Wes Cheng alongside Brad Bierman. Thanks so much for joining us on this Friday, August 14, 2026. So much to talk about as always, and we begin today's show with football. We're midway through preseason camp. We've had a chance to see a few new Syracuse practices and speak to the players and coaches. Brad, what are you looking at for this time of the year?
Well, Wes, there are two things I'm looking at, and they both involve the battle in the trenches. That's pass protection on offense and the pass rush on defense. To me, this is going to be the key to the upcoming season. Of course, it's always the key in the game of football, who wins the battle of the trenches, but never more important for a Syracuse team looking to bounce back with a very tough schedule that's really increased the depth at all levels through, from freshmen coming in who are now sophomores that are going to contribute, to the transfers, the grad students that have come into the program. And then I also look at the coaching upgrade on both sides. So we really haven't talked a lot about John Scott Jr., the new defensive line coach, and just going through his bio, seeing his philosophy, hearing about a couple of the players who have talked about his input so far. So let's not forget, he's a 25 to 30-year veteran coach, NFL and college. So I really think he's coaching up that unit. And you look at the grad students that they brought in from UNLV, Maryland, and Tennessee Martin. These are big players who are going to make a really productive year for the Orange, I believe. And part of that 8-man rotation, along with guys like Perry and Oma Periola, who return there. So that's going to be key, getting a rush on all those great quarterbacks that Syracuse is going to face this year. And then certainly, conversely, protecting Steve Angeli so he can play most of this, if not all of the season, getting a running game going and letting those athletes on offense perform.
Yeah, and you're not even mentioning Jeremy Hawkins, the new edge coach, who I think is also going to have a big impact on that defensive line, Brad. And a couple of things that pop out to me. I wanted to start off with the tight ends, because where they're at now with Dan Villari now in the NFL, I think one name that we really need to look out for is David Clement. He's played 36 games across 3 seasons, been used primarily as a blocker on offense and appearing on special teams, only 3 career receptions for 30 yards. But I think he's in for an expanded role. He's definitely been a leader at preseason camp. So that's a name to keep an eye out as Syracuse revamps its tight end. On defense, there's been a lot of buzz around true freshman linebacker Jamonis Sackie. He was the spring MVP. He made some waves. Everyone who was at the spring game saw that stopping of running back Juwan Johnson behind the line during the spring game. So I do expect him to play right away and be part of that 2-deep chart. And what's turning out to be a pretty experienced linebacker core, of course, with all the returning players that they have and then the transfers coming in. So, Brad, 2 names that I think stand out are Sackie and Clement. I do want to point out that on the offensive and defensive line, where you talked about before, that is probably the most important part for, again, protecting Angeli, which didn't happen last year, and then also putting pressure on opposing quarterbacks. That's the key to success right there.
And I'm going to spotlight, has to be the biggest player in Syracuse football history, Byron Washington, the outstanding sophomore offensive lineman, 6'7", listed at 400. I'll believe that when I see it. Going to see the Orangemen play in Virginia in October, but really looking for him to lead that charge. Again, with transfers coming in and Juan Castillo's work on that unit, really looking for big things this year.
And Brad, we move on to basketball. John Rothstein from CBS Sports reporting on Thursday that Syracuse will face St. John's on November 15th at Madison Square Garden. It will be the first time that Syracuse has played at the Mecca of basketball since the 2021-22 season. Brad, you have to like this addition to the schedule now that it's officially announced that we have a specific date.
And I really like, Wes, where it's filled into the schedule. Early on, okay, the team won't really be gelling yet that soon, just into mid-November. But I still like that challenge coming 6 days after playing a neutral court game in Indianapolis against Indiana. What I really like now is the non-conference schedule has been put into place, is the flow. In that Syracuse has a couple of tune-ups early on, then plays Indiana, then now has the St. John's game 6 days later, but then a couple of more tune-ups before going to Oklahoma, likewise a couple more tune-ups before playing Providence in Boston in December. So I like that flow, how Jerry McNamara has worked it, and I really like the Rutgers game being played in February. I really think that there should be a shift to that, and I was looking back in the record book on this, the media guides, Wes. This game against Rutgers, February 6th in Brooklyn, will be the latest game Syracuse has played non-conference, going all the way back to that infamous game at Michigan State in the championship season, 2003. Wow, that's a long time. So that was that famous CBS game. Syracuse beat the Spartans by a point and went on, of course, to win the title. But I really like playing a non-conference Power 5, Power 4, Power 6 conference team late in the season in the mix of all that ACC. And one final thought, the only downside to the non-conference schedule, no marquee names for the fans to come in. All the big names are going to be in the ACC this year, and they're big with Duke, North Carolina, Virginia, and Louisville. But I wish there, it would be that way next year with home and homes. But I wish there was more marquee name recognition to the non-conference schedule.
So a couple notes at the top, Brad. Syracuse owns a 51-41 record all-time against St. John's. They've lost the last 4 games against them, including 2022 and a 76-69 loss. I am a bit disappointed that we won't get to see the orange matchup against former Syracuse forward Donnie Freeman. We all know he transferred to St. John's during the offseason, but suffered an Achilles injury over the summer. He's out the entire year. But no doubt that this is great for Syracuse basketball, right? Jerry McNamara put together a schedule that Jim Boeheim would be proud of. You know that the New York City Syracuse alumni are going to turn out in droves to Madison Square Garden, and it's going to be an electric crowd, reminiscent probably of the 80s and 90s in the old Big East, especially with Rick Pitino on the other sideline. So I love this idea. Kudos to Jerry McNamara for scheduling this game.
And I hope it's not the first time they're going to do this under GMAC. Hope it can become an annual affair playing in the Garden, or certainly in New York City.
So we're going to take a quick break. ESPN's Andrea Adelson. When we return, this is the Juice on the Cuse podcast. Back on the Juice on the Cuse podcast, Wes Cheng here with you, and we were thrilled to welcome back our great friend from ESPN and Insider Access, Andrea Adelson. Andrea, thanks as always for coming on. Now the 14th consecutive year we've had you, so really happy
14.
About that.
Woo-hoo. All right, so we got past unlucky 13, and it was unlucky for Syracuse. So we're just gonna move past that and focus on a great number, 14.
Yes, that's exactly right. And Andrea, I want to get you started on this one. We were talking pre-show about this, but the biggest news I think from the summer is this new 5-for-5 rule. If you're in the class of 2022, you're allowed to return to campus now for a 5th year. What do you make of all of this?
Well, I wish I had a law degree, if I was being honest, because then I'd be able to understand a lot more of what's going on, just because that's where we are. I mean, everything that's being decided right now with the NCAA, college football, college sports in general is in the courts. And put aside what they're trying to do in Congress with the Protect College Sports Act. I mean, the whole reason they're in Congress right now with the Protect College Sports Act, which may or may not happen, is because all the lawsuits that have challenged not just eligibility, as you just mentioned, with the new 5-for-5 rule, but also rev share, NIL, how much should players earn? On and on it goes. And so now with this latest, which I understand the players, right? The NCAA comes out, they says we're changing all our rules and we're just going to do a 5-for-5, right? Yeah, 5 years to play. And if you get hurt, I mean, we don't do waivers anymore. We're not doing redshirts anymore. You got your 5 years. But they made it starting this year and they didn't grandfather players in, which they should have done, quite frankly, because I think we all knew this was going to happen, that this was once again going to be challenged. And so now you've had players file lawsuits, added to rosters in the middle of fall camp because guys have got injunctions filed. And so now they're eligible for their 5th season of football. So it's been a wild time. And there's several players in the ACC who literally were just added back to rosters last week. Same thing at Indiana and some other places across the country. So I think the best word to use, even though we've been in this now with rev share, NIL lawsuits, remains unpredictable. Because I still don't know how this whole thing is going to play out. I need a magic 8-ball and a law degree to help me figure it out.
Well, Andrew, let's move away from the courtroom and onto the gridiron, because for so many years, I think you and I have been talking about Clemson as a clear-cut favorite in the ACC. It's almost like a broken record, but that's not the case anymore. There's SMU, there's Louisville, there's Clemson. They're all actually chasing preseason favorite Miami, the U, back in play now. So is there anyone else that can in the ACC that can close the gap? And do you see Miami being on top at the end of the year?
Well, the funny thing about all of this, when we say close the gap, is Miami still hasn't won an ACC title. Yes, they made it to the national championship game. And you can kind of see where they're going on their trajectory. And it's obvious why they're the preseason favorite, the overwhelming preseason favorite. Of course, they're my preseason favorite. They're outspending everybody. Let's just say that right out of the gate, right? There isn't anybody close to Miami in terms of what they're spending on their roster. Can anyone close the gap on that? I think that may be a bigger question moving forward. As of right now, I don't see that happening again unless something passes through the College Sports Act and they try to put a rein on spending, which has gotten out of control, right? It was supposed to be rev share, add a couple extra dollars on top in NIL. It is rev share, but it's a lot of money on top with NIL and teams figuring out some funny math how to do it. Now, in terms of talent and rosters, I think Miami is the clear-cut favorite when it comes to their talent and who they have, and they're too deep the way they've built it in the trenches. Questions, of course, replacing the majority of their offensive and defensive front, offensive line and defensive line. So I think that's one thing. But the way they've recruited, the way they've hit the portal, the way they've developed players makes you feel like, well, they're not rebuilding. They're just kind of reloading. I think there are some teams that can challenge Miami. And you mentioned SMU. SMU beat Miami last year. I was at that game. And they were outcoached, quite frankly, and out-schemed. And that's a big reason why. And if you look at Miami's losses over the last couple of seasons, I'll include Louisville, another team that I think a lot of people are talking about. They also beat Miami last year. And they did it in creative ways in terms of scheming up Miami to take advantage of what those teams felt were perceived weaknesses, keeping the ball away from the offense. The way that Louisville jumped on Miami early on in that game kind of helped them ride it out. So SMU and Louisville, I would say, should be in the mix because they actually beat Miami last year. And without one of those losses, right, Miami would have been playing for an ACC championship. So those are the teams that I picked to finish in the top three. My biggest wild card is Clemson. You mentioned Clemson. Does anyone know what Clemson's going to look like this year? If you know, let me know, because I have no idea, right? I mean, I think this team can be about 500, or I think this team potentially could win 8 or 9 games if they hit everything right. A lot of that, of course, is going to revolve around Chris Vizina and whether he can hang on to that starting quarterback job. But it's interesting because I don't have Clemson in the top three. And as you mentioned at the top, that's unusual and different. But until Miami proves they can win an ACC championship, right, it's hard to even say if someone can close the gap because they haven't even been able to win the conference yet.
So we're talking about the top 3 or 4 teams in the conference, but every year I ask you this question, there are going to be some dark horse ACC teams. I mentioned Virginia from last year that really can outkick their coverage, beat their preseason predictions. What do you see on that front this year, Andrea?
How were my predictions last year? Were they terrible? They probably were. I don't want to know, actually. Like, forget that I even said that. Hopefully I was right on one of them, but I had to write it down because there are 17 teams now. And I think a lot of this is really like schedule dependent too, like who avoids some of the teams that we were just talking about as being in the top tier. So I'm going to give you 3 possibilities. And I do think, look, I am going on the record now as saying I am going to be absolutely shocked and stunned if Syracuse only wins 3 games this year. I think they should be considered because of how low things got last year, right? And we all know, we don't need to dissect what happened. But if Steve Angeli can play the full season, I have a lot of high hopes for Syracuse, and they could be added to this list. I know we're going to talk about Cuse here in a second, but there's 3 teams. I looked at the preseason media poll, so I could pick 3 in the bottom half. So starting at number 8, I think Virginia Tech, again, in the same boat as Syracuse. I would be shocked if they only win 3 games this year. I think adding James Franklin to the mix automatically gives them at least 2 to 3 more wins as compared to last year. And especially with the talent they brought over from Penn State, what they're able to do on the recruiting trail, keeping Brent Pry as their defensive coordinator, having one of the best defensive players in the entire conference in Kamari Copeland back to be able to anchor that defensive front. And what I've seen just from the development of some of their skill position players makes me feel like Virginia Tech has a good chance of finishing higher than 8th. Pitt is another team. They're preseason 9. And their issue has been really like being terrible in the month of November the last 2 years. They start off strong, then something happens. But I'm just going to tell you some key highlights, which makes me put Pitt here. Not just because they returned Mason Heinschels, who one of the best quarterbacks coming back. On their schedule this year are 4 teams that didn't make a bowl game from last year, and they will be favored in all 3 of their non-conference games. They don't have Cincinnati or West Virginia there in the non-conference. Their hardest one is UCF, and that's at Pitt, and UCF didn't have a winning record last year. So again, when I figure this out or I look at these teams, I look at talent, returning players, who they added from the portal, and the schedule. And I think Pitt's schedule sets up really nicely for them as we look at their team. And another one I think a lot of people have mentioned before is Cal. Cal was picked to finish 12th. I will be shocked if they finish in the bottom third of the ACC because of JKS, their quarterback, Jaron Cave Sangapolatelli. And if folks out there didn't get a chance to watch him last year, I think Cal's on the schedule, I Bleav, week 2 for Syracuse. So you guys will get a firsthand look here up close and personal. I mean, talking to coaches at ACC kickoff, all of them basically said this guy has the potential to be the number 1 overall pick in the NFL draft next year. If all goes according to plan, he still stays healthy, the development is there. He is as pure a passer as you will see, and just makes incredible throws, but also has just got a great sense for the pocket, right? Great pocket awareness. They went in the portal with their new coach, Tosh Lupoy, and they hit it hard, revamped the offensive line. I like the players they brought in at the skill positions. They were terrible at receiver last year. They won't be this year. And at running back, Adam Muhammad from Washington, I think, is a future star. And obviously, Tosh's background is on defense. And they lost a bunch of guys on their defense. I think they'll continue to be great there. So those are my 3 teams to keep an eye on that I think will finish higher than what the preseason ranking said.
Okay, so let's move to the 4th team on that list that you touched on. And this is a Syracuse podcast, so I have to ask you, I don't know what to make of Syracuse, right? You see some prognostications. You mentioned it, only winning 3 games. I could also see them winning 6 games and getting to a bowl. You mentioned Steve Angeli finally being healthy again. Syracuse retooling its coaching staff in the offseason, especially on the defensive end. So where do you stand on them? It's always hard to make a prediction on Syracuse, especially this year, I think.
Yeah, it really is. And I think last year I said I thought they'd make a bowl game. And if Angeli had stayed healthy after that Clemson game, I was like feeling good about that prediction because they look great to start the year. But obviously, I think there's a couple things Fran Brown learned in the conversations I've had with him, just going back in the spring and then again at ACC meetings. Not having quality depth at quarterback was obviously a gigantic issue for this team. And it's something that Fran Brown said, if that ever happens to me again, that I shouldn't even be here coaching anymore. Like that was a failure on my part, right? The fact that a walk-on lacrosse player starting at quarterback, that's something that can never happen again. And so it's not just Steve Angeli coming back and being 100%. It's the fact they went in the transfer portal and got talent to serve as backups and be competition for Steve Angeli. Of course, we all knew he's coming back healthy. He's going to be the starter, but he wasn't healthy in the spring. So they were able to develop some of that competition they needed at the quarterback spot. And they brought in Malachi Nelson, who's like the former number 1 quarterback recruit, right? So you like the moves that Fran Brown made in terms of where they needed help. Now, obviously, it hurts when you have to retool the receiver position. But again, like Syracuse, when they have had a talented quarterback, hasn't really had an issue in terms of getting those guys the balls and getting guys as 1,000-yard receivers. I mean, we saw that in year 1 with Fran Brown and Kyle McCord. We saw that before Kyle McCord got there at the end with Dino Babers, right? There was always somebody who kind of stepped up. I'm not as worried about the receiver position. You want to make sure the offensive line is solid. Again, we'll see how that plays itself out because
Evergreen
that's kind of been, right? That's been an issue with that consistency over the last couple of years and getting guys to stay healthy. Defensively, there's some stars on that defense, right? I mean, when you look at the corners, the best cornerback duo in the ACC, you look at the linebacker play. Yes, we need to see how the defensive line kind of gels and progresses with some new faces in there, but there is talent on this roster. And I think the fact that Fran Brown recognized and realizes some of the shortcomings and did things a little bit differently with the team, just in terms of like establishing the culture, establishing the way things are going to be around there. I mean, he mentioned last year things fell apart in the locker room when Angeli got hurt, and there was a lot of finger pointing, and he doesn't want something like that to ever happen again either, right? So I am encouraged by all the things that Fran Brown has said. Having said that, this schedule,
Oof.
I think, rivals Florida State as the hardest one in the ACC. They may not play Miami, but Notre Dame's on there. And then everyone else that you don't want to play is on this schedule. So
SMU, Louisville, you just mentioned Cal.
Correct. Exactly. Clemson, right? At Virginia's not going to, Virginia should be as good as last year, quite frankly, because they also went in the portal and made some moves. They bring back their entire offensive line. So even some games were last year, right? You're like, I don't know about Virginia. I mean, Virginia won 11 games last year. And should be pretty good again, right? At NC State, I mean, Dave Doran feels great about his team going into this season. I mean, he is like desperate to get 10 wins, and they've got a quarterback coming back in CJ Bailey, right? So it's not just the Louisvilles, the SMUs, and having to play Clemson and Notre Dame. It's some of these other teams, right? Like when you look at the middle of the pack in the ACC and everyone's kind of bunched up together, right? I mean, last year there was 5 6-2 teams, and then I think 5 4-4 teams in the conference, and one team in Virginia that finished with 1 loss. You want to put yourself in that situation, right? Where that middle, where everyone's just kind of like all the same. If you can pick off some of those teams right there, like that's where you kind of start being able to move up and elevate the program. And that's where NC State was a year ago. That's where Cal was a year ago, right? Those, in my mind, should be games that Syracuse has to be able to win to be able to get to 6 wins and back to the postseason when you look at the degree of difficulty overall in this schedule.
Andrea, we love having you on. One of our favorite guests, Andrea Adelson from ESPN and Inside Access. Andrew, year number 14. Thank you so much again. Thank you so much for your insight. We appreciate having you on. Enjoy the college football season. We'll catch up with you soon.
Great to be back on, Wes. And I'm already marking it down for year 15. Okay. I hope I'm not counting my chickens, but hopefully we'll make it next year.
Oh, we absolutely will. Thank you again, Andrea.
Thank you.
Back on the Juice on the Cuse podcast, Wes Cheng alongside Brad Bierman. Thanks for listening to the show, and don't forget to hit subscribe, leave a 5-star rating, and write a review. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. Brad, we are right at the end of our show. You got a closing thought for us?
Yes, I do, Wes. And I'm going to go back to football, as we talked about in preseason practice, and looking over the roster. And what really jumped out to me is the depth is there. Now, a lot of these young players are unproven, but what we're really looking at is there are going to be injuries in football. There always is. It's going to happen. And you can't anticipate, of course, which players, which positions, and how that's going to affect the team, but they're going to happen. And when you think that way, and then you look at the roster this year, what I'm at least encouraged by is depth. Depth at the key positions doesn't mean these players can step in and perform up to the level of the starters, but the depth is better than it has been, I'd say, in the last 5 years, certainly at the end of the Dino Babers era, and certainly at the best of the young Fran Brown era. That's encouraging for something we know that's going to happen, injuries to the Orange on this year's football team.
Brad, my closing thought is on the women's soccer team. The Orange opened its 2026 season on Thursday with a 0-0 draw against Villanova at SU Soccer Stadium. Junior goalkeeper Maya Maimoli made 4 second-half saves as the Orange opened their 31st season. They'll be back in action when they host Holy Cross on Sunday, August 16th at 1 p.m. Brad, it's great because fall sports are back. They're back in action, and we're only a couple weeks away from kickoff with football.
It's crazy to me, Wes, how early it is here, mid-August. It seems like the lacrosse players just left Memorial Day weekend. Here we are, but it's real exciting. I'm so geared up for fall sports, the Orange season opener, even against an FCS team in New Hampshire. Really excited. And, hey, let's try to pack the dome this year. Let's turn out some believers into what Fran Brown always says, into his team.
That's it for us. For Brad Bierman, this is Wes Cheng. You've been listening to the Juice on the Cuse podcast presented by Bleav and On SI, and we will see you next time.